So we started calling this, well, they started calling this the inquiry square at one point, and I actually think that's a misnomer, or I would call it something different. And I would call it something like the 5 kinds of knowledge you would use in order to help you figure out what you would pay attention to when kids are doing things. Clearly, the inquiry square is much more catchy, right? So when I think about these 5 kinds of knowledge, what I'm thinking about are I have to decide as a teacher, what am I going to pay attention to in order to see if my kids really understand something. Okay? So that's how I think through this. So if I'm looking to see if kids are really understanding things, I'm going to ask them to think about 2 general kinds of knowledge. One is declarative knowledge, which to me would be facts, terms, vocabulary, principles, concepts, how those things are related. Things that you could say and you could demonstrate in a piece of writing or in a number of different ways. But if they really understand something, that means they can do something. They're going to make something, right? They're going to compose something. So there's a procedural kind of knowledge that helps us figure out if kids really understand something. They have to perform in a certain way. Okay? Now we break these down into 2 categories, right? So one category is about form. Right? So we can look at declarative knowledge of form, which would be if we're going to have, so as a teacher educator, I have my students make unit plans. Right? So I'm going to ask them questions about, do they know what a lesson plan is? Do they know what an objective is? Do they know what assessment means versus evaluation and the nuances between them? I'm going to actually ask them, and they're going to tell me. And they're going to try and explain to me how those things are related. There's also procedural knowledge of form. So if I'm having them create a unit plan, I'm going to see, can they actually write a lesson plan? Can they actually write an assessment? Can they actually tie those things together? Okay, so I'm starting to see if they can understand a little bit about how you create lessons that help their students understand things. Okay, now there's also, you can also break these down into substance. You might also call this content. Okay, so if my students are designing lessons about Romeo and Juliet, for instance, and they have a unit that's with the overarching question, what is a relationship? I'm going to ask them questions about the substance of that unit. Can they tell me what it is they want their students to understand about relationships? And that is a declarative knowledge of substance. That lets me know that they know a little bit about the content that they're going to be dealing with and the relationships between concepts. But there's also procedural knowledge of substance. So a struggle that student teachers or pre-service teachers often have is they can't often articulate what it is they want their students, in this case, to know about relationships. So they actually have to know how to go out and see what people say about relationships. See what social literature has to say about the way people relate to one another and what creates a healthy relationship and what creates a dysfunctional relationship. Like, what are the concepts there? So do my students know how to go out and find that? Now, this is all well and good, but this isn't enough. If we really want to see our students really understand something, they have to do things, they have to be able to take into account what's behind it, which would be different purposes and contexts. So imagine this as being sort of a backdrop behind all of this. So one context might be they're working with 8th graders. Another context might be they're working with seniors who are teaching AP. Another context might be that they're working with English language learners. Another context difference might be rural versus urban. Does that matter? So if I can see if they truly understand these things and then can imagine what that might look like for different reasons and in different places and at different times. That lets me know if they really understand something. So if my students are making unit plans, I'm looking for these different things at different times, but I also have to figure out how am I going to sequence my instruction? How am I gonna support them in making this unit plan? So this is where the 5 kinds of composing come into play. All right? And there's no real order to these. Jeff and I sometimes flip-flop. Like, he likes to start with planning. I like to start with practicing a little bit more for different reasons. But if I'm going to have students create lesson plan, I'm going to have them practice writing little mini lessons before they write longer lessons. I'm going to have them practice writing different objectives. I'm going to have them practice making conceptual maps of the idea of relationships and healthy relationships versus dysfunctional relationships. So I'm going to have them practice the parts of the thing that they're going to create. So when they're doing this composing to practice, I, as a teacher, have to decide which part of this do I want to pay attention to see if they're understanding. So this becomes an assessment to help me figure out what I want to notice when they're doing this kind of composing. Okay. Then composing the plan would be, all right, start sketching out your unit plan. Let's just take a calendar and sort of figure out when you want to do things. So you might do, the gateway activity first, and then you might want to do the culminating activity at the end, and then you might want to work backwards and figure out what parts you need to have your students doing things along the way. So composing the plan would be sort of to lay out the different parts and see how they go together. When my students are doing this, I'm looking to see, I have to decide which of this I want to pay attention to in order to see how they're understanding the form of a unit plan and the substance of the particular unit plan. Then they're going to start drafting. And they're going to turn in stuff, and I'm going to give them feedback, and I have to decide, well, what do they understand about the form? What do they understand about the substance? Are they not understanding the concepts of a unit plan? Or are they not understanding how to go about doing things? Or do they not understand the context in which they're imagining their students working? This becomes an assessment. I have to decide what I want to pay attention to as they're doing this. Then they're going to turn something into me. They're going to finalize and they're going to publish it, and they're going to share it with one another. They might share it with the mentor teacher who will work with them. And then at the end, I'm gonna have them write a reflection. I'm gonna ask them questions about these different kinds of things in order to see if they can really take this experience of writing a unit plan for me and think about, well, what would they do again next time? What would they do differently if they could do this thing over again? What would they do if the context changed? How would they adapt that unit plan? So I'm going to ask that kind of writing helps me know that they understand these different parts of putting together one project. And it's also going to help me know if they understand these concepts or this process.